Welcome back, America. We're here with somebody who really deserves a Pulitzer Prize at some point. I think Trump gets the Nobel Peace Prize, and I think Miranda gets the Pulitzer Prize, and I get the Booby Prize. But nonetheless, the great New York Post columnist, and to me, you're more than a columnist. You're like an investigative reporter, Miranda Devine. I want us to go slowly, step by step, on what you've uncovered with respect to the assassination attempt on the president and Butler and the FBI and the Secret Service, because it is earth-shattering what you've uncovered. And a lot of people are busy, so they're not really sure about the whole thing that took place. Why don't you take us from the beginning and begin to walk us through this?
Thanks, Mark. I think that the reason that it is so shocking is that it's now a year and a half since Butler, and we have got now the Trump FBI in charge, and we still don't know anything about Thomas Crooks, the 20-year-old would-be assassin, who, remember, he shot 8 bullets, and one of them hit Donald Trump in the ear, narrowly missing killing him. And also, he killed Corey Comparatori, the firefighter, and severely injured 2 other men sitting in the bleachers behind Donald Trump. This was one of the most terrifying, shocking assassination attempts in history, and yet we are told to shut up, stop asking questions. And back in February, I interviewed Donald Trump when he first became president, and I asked him about Butler and Thomas Crooks, and he said, yes, we need to know more. And he turned and spoke to one of his people, and he said, tell the Secret Service, I need to know everything I deserve to know. When I followed up to find out if he was told, I was told that the Secret Service wasn't involved. It was the FBI who had all the information about the investigation. And then we heard nothing really until this source, who I've known the source for a very long time. He has a client who had done his own amateur sleuthing just using private investigator tools, but also, apart from that, open source that's available to anyone. And he managed to uncover the digital footprint of Thomas Crooks that had been hidden from us. And he found some very disturbing features of this digital footprint. And he looked at 17 different platforms that Thomas Crooks had was very active on, online, had accounts with. And on YouTube alone, there were more than 700 comments made by Thomas Crooks. And you can see the trajectory of a teenage boy, 15, 16, 17, who is progressively getting more and more violent and aggressive. And he starts off as very pro-Trump and really anti-Democrat. There are messages there where he says, in all caps, murder the Democrats. He hated the Squad, AOC, Ilhan Omar. And his rhetoric was very violent against them. But then something happened to him in January of 2020. He flipped 180 degrees and he became rabidly anti-Trump. And for the next, until August of 2020, when his entire digital footprint went dark, he was a ghost. He was not active on any of those accounts that my source could find. During those 8 months, he was just increasingly antagonistic to Trump, antagonistic to his supporters that he called a cult and sheep. And eventually he started liaising or communicating with a Norwegian neo-Nazi called Willy Tepes. I don't believe that's his real name, but that's the name he used online. And Willy Tepes belonged to a group in Norway that was sanctioned by the State Department and designated as a terrorist group last year. In fact, in June, a month before Butler, although I don't have any reason to think that's anything more than a coincidence. But Willy Tepes would encourage Thomas Crooks in his talk of violence, but about how the only way you can seize power is through the barrel of a gun. And after Crooks made his final and most violent statement and most detailed statement about assassinating political leaders, assassinating military leaders, he disappeared offline until, of course, 4 years later, he pops up in Butler on a rooftop shooting at the president.
That is a remarkable amount of detail that you've uncovered. on your own with the help of people that you know that we're not aware that the FBI has uncovered. And I want to pursue some of this when you come back. His flip, and I read your column, actually took place in a 6 to 8 week period. I mean, it was hot and then cold. Pro-Trump, anti-Trump. It was that quick. This Norwegian outfit, I want to pursue that with you as well. And then my question to you is, there was testimony given by the director of the FBI at the time, Wray, and his deputy, that discussed none of this. Zero. Now, either they didn't look or they didn't want to talk about it. Now, this is pretty stunning because this assassination attempt on Donald Trump is going to be discussed for decades. And the idea that we're going to need a commission 20 years from now to figure out everything, no, we need to know right now.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.